Hello, authors. Welcome to Author Nation. I am Melody. I'm your host, and today I'm introducing to you Frank Wilson. Frank Wilson is a retired university professor from the United Kingdom who moved to Victoria in 2008. He has published 2 books of short stories in the United Kingdom and 3 books of poetry. Chasing Crows, Apple Man, and Crows in the Apple Tree in Canada. In recent times, he's contributed poetry to The Island Writer and the COVID Anthology. And his most recent book of short stories, Nowt at All Like Home, which is what we are talking about today, was published by Tusitala Victoria in 2020. Here is Frank Wilson. Hey, Frank, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, this is, I've been enjoying some of your stories in here, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about this. But before we get to that, I want to talk about your work. You were a university professor in the United Kingdom, but when I think of professors, I think of them in the classroom teaching, but you also traveled, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your work and how your work took you around the world?
Okay, I was, maybe am, an agricultural economist, but wholly concerned with overseas development. So I never worked as an agricultural economist in the UK or in Europe. It was always in relationship to what in those days were called third world countries or less developed parts of the world.
Right.
That's where I started, and that's the way I carried through.
Right. Okay. So you're traveling took you around because you were working on agricultural development.
Yeah.
As an agricultural economist in a variety of countries.
That's right.
Okay. Excellent. So that probably means you didn't do a lot of creative writing. You probably did a lot of very serious kind of work type writing, academic writing.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Yes.
I mean,
but
just as in North America, I mean, the same thing applies. Publish or perish, or certainly you don't perish, but you won't advance.
Yes. You publish or perish. And not advancing means perish, I suppose. So publish or perish. But here's the thing. So you're traveling around, you're doing all this academic writing, which isn't very exciting, but you're going to all these new cultures and you're immersed with these new languages and new cultures and new ways of thinking, new ways of solving problems and all these interesting people. So did you keep a journal during this time? Did you do any kind of creative or personal writing during those years?
I probably should have kept a journal. I kept a very detailed diary, which probably, looking back now, I can always find the diary for 1989 or 95 if I want to find something to stimulate something and get it going, like for the most recent book. But I should have written more, but I probably didn't have time. I don't know. Snippets on little bits of paper found here, there, and everywhere. Sometimes they're useful, but I didn't do it as I think I would recommend other people to do.
Yeah. So you did do some diary keeping and but not like a journaling. But you would recommend, looking back, that's something that you might have done during your travels that you could tap into now.
I think so. And lots of people keep a journal who never do a lot with it in terms of writing it for anyone else to read, but that doesn't make it any less valuable to them personally. And I would always recommend it anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. So when your academic life ended and you were ready to open that next chapter in your book of life, so to speak, you turned your attention to more creative writing endeavors. And so including short stories and poetry. And when we were talking about this interview, you made it very clear that this was not a hobby. And so can you, and I loved that you said that, because I know people who have full-time jobs and they write, or they're retired and they write, or they do something else and they write, and that people look at them and say, well, writing must be your hobby then. But for you're adamant it is not a hobby. You have other hobbies. So can you explain how writing fits in?
Yeah, I think I was probably trying to say that it's a bit more important to me than being a hobby. And when I think about that, I'm not sure. I need to think even more about what that's meant to me. But it meant, I suppose, that whereas singing in the choir is important to me, I love singing. I love playing golf. Whether I need to sing, whether I need to play golf, no. I need to write.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's just the distinction, perhaps.
Yeah. No, that's actually, that's wonderful. Continue.
Well, and sometimes it's come out as poetry and sometimes it's come out as prose. And I move between the two in a way that probably means I'm always trying to tell a story. A lot of my poetry has a narrative base. They say. When I talk to other, not all of it, but it's clear that quite a bit of it does. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that in preparation for this, and thinking, well, there are two or three poems which I can think about, which could well have been short stories, and at least one that is both. You know, at least one area, one particular subject that got treated both ways. Yeah.
No, I think you make a really important point. You know, as human beings, we need to express ourselves and share things, and that can come out in several ways. And for you, writing, and so it's not just a hobby, it's a form of expression, it's a form of communicating with the world, right? And understanding it and sharing that. So that I really love that. Really well done. So you write nonfiction, or do you think you write fiction, or do you think you write autofiction? So where do you think your writing fits into the definitions of writing, or the genre, big genres?
I was looking in the introduction to at least one of the books,
and
I tried to make it clear that this is not a straightforward memoir. And I go on to say, because I think memoirs should be true. And this is partly true.
Yes.
Often predominantly true, but certainly not wholly true. Now, where that puts it, I mean, to me, I always just use the term creative nonfiction, but whether that's a more complicated, in other words, it's certainly nonfiction, because it starts off as nonfiction. I'm nonfiction. I'm real. I'm writing about what was and what is.
Yep.
But somebody said, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And I guess there's a little bit of that comes in.
Yeah.
You know, I want to make that story about old-fashioned thrashing days on the farm before the days of combine harvesters into a little bit more than a kind of slightly gently humorous description. I need a story. Something has to happen. And maybe that happened, and maybe it sort of didn't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely know what you mean. And I agree, you know, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story is a good point. And I also agree with you that if you're writing a memoir, it must be true to the best of your knowledge. You need to be able to stand up and say, this is what I believed happened. Whether this is what happened or not, it doesn't matter. This is what I remember. This is what I believe happened. And you know, my brother may see it differently, or my cousin may see it differently, but this is what I remember. That's a memoir. So yours is a little bit more like autofiction, whereas, you know, which I best described as based on a true story, but not necessarily true, right? Excellent. So let's...
Go on. No, it's okay.
Go ahead.
I struggle a bit with that, but you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit more than based on truth. It's quite a lot of it is true. Okay, it's a proportion thing.
Yeah, it is. It's a proportion thing.
That varies. There's a lot more truth in this.
Yes.
Or a lot less creative difference in this than there is in this one. And that.
Right.
The two ones that are very much about my early life and the characters and the people of rural north of England.
Right.
So there's more creation in that than there is in this, but there's a bit more than a bit in there too.
Fair. Well, let's start on this one. Let's talk about this one. But before we actually dive right into this one, the title, Nowt like home. you have a series of books that start with Nowt, Nautical like home. So where does this Nowt come from? Nautical like home.
I have worried about that a bit, but you say it very well. And people struggle with N-O-W-T. Of course, it's Oldie English or Northern English for naught. So
there we go.
Naught meaning nothing, nothing at all like home. Note is a Yorkshire, Lancashire, north of England expression for nothing. And
yes.
it came from a quote that I picked up in the first book, and having used it in that book, because Note to do with me was something that was said by one character in the book.
Right.
I liked it. I liked the story title. So I decided to call the whole thing Note to do with me.
Right.
The second one, I decided that would do because, again, I had a quote and I wanted to use Note again.
Right.
Rightly or wrongly, just to keep it rolling. And those two were both published by the same publisher in the UK, and he wanted, or the main editor wanted, Note to stay. So
absolutely.
Having got it there twice, I thought that worked at all, because someone did actually once say to me when we were coming to emigrate eventually, that even when I first started traveling and living overseas, it'll be not at all like home. Well, of course, one has to make it something like home, and home is where you are. So it's always noted. I mean, it can't be not at all like home, but it all has to be not at all like home. It has to be like home.
Exactly.
I hope you understand that.
And I think that starting with Nowt, I think it makes it a series of books, right? It makes it clear this is a series of books by the same author on different topics, but you're going to get the same kind of style of short story. That's what you're getting, and that makes it really, really clear. So let's talk about this book. So what is Nautical like home about?
Someone said after I'd done the second book, which was very much based in the north of England, but who knew all about our overseas life and my overseas work, that I should write some stories about that. And so that's where we started. And I thought, how can I do that? I'll do that from where I started, or where we started, because when I first went to Kenya in 1965, we were just married. And so there were two young people going to Kenya and starting this whole set of adventures, which involved often both of us and sometimes just me, in the next whatever many years, 1965 to 2000, I guess. Only 35 years.
And I have to say,
I retired early, it was only 35 years.
And I have to say, I really reading this book, I really enjoyed that sense of adventure that both you and your wife have. It's like this young couple with no babies traveling, a couple of babies traveling, 3 babies traveling. It's like there's a real sense of adventure in this, right? Like, here we are. We could just stay home. You could get a university professorship, and you could stay at home, and you could have an easier, I don't have to adapt constantly type of life. But you didn't choose that. Both you and your wife embrace this like, let's go explore the world, right? Let's go meet people attitude. And I love that about this book. So
I was 23. My wife was 21 when we got on that boat and went by sea all the way to East Africa for the first time.
I think there's so much adventure in this, right? So that said, what is the promise of this book? So if I saw this in the store and I'm looking for a book to read, and I pick it up and I look at the front and the back and I read through, what is the promise of this book? What's in it for me, the reader?
It's about journeys, it's about destinations, but hopefully people can read enough of it to realize that it is about people, about characters along the way. Just in the same way that any success, any pleasure that might come out of reading my first 2 books was because they were wrapped around, the stories were wrapped around characters or collections of characters that were interesting and gently amusing, with a little bit of other stuff thrown in. But yeah, that was the main thing. It's wrapped around characters wherever they are.
Yes. Yeah.
Wherever they are.
And who had fun personalities, right? Who were in some ways similar to you and your wife, that they were, you know, embracing adventure, right? They're embracing risk and, you know, trying new things, right?
Yeah, and I think in the context of the third book, there's a lot of very good, serious writing about Africa, India, Pakistan, the South Pacific. Yeah. Not necessarily academic, but serious kind of travel writing. Yeah. Which gets into the politics and the economics. I can do politics, I can do economics, but not in this book. Not for me.
Yes, right? Yes.
And that's not to devalue the poverty, the issues, the problems, the difficulties. It's just the expatriate life gives you the opportunity to see a lot of interesting and sometimes ridiculously amusing things that you might sometimes be able to turn into words for someone else to enjoy.
Yes. Although you do pepper it with information. You know, I do notice that you do. Yeah, you do pepper it with information. I am going to walk away as the reader with a little bit more knowledge of what it might have been like at the time.
Well, the story that includes something about the West Bank, in the story about Israel and Jordan, you know, you cannot visit there without conveying how you felt about certain situations. So yeah, excellent. So just to be clear, this is a collection of short stories that you don't have to read from front cover to back cover. No. And I always have you know, a book of poetry or a book of short stories kind of on the living room table, 1 or 2 or sometimes 5, because it's nice to be able to, you know, in the evening you're tired and, you know, just nice, pick something up and read some poetry or read a short story. It's not going to take you long. You don't have to invest a lot in it, but you get the enjoyment of something and some, you know, relaxing time. So which is your favorite story in this? And you can have more than one favorite story, easiest to write versus, you know, best lived, you know, but tell us a little bit about your favorite story. I think a favorite story is for me to read again. Is one of the stories that's based in Zambia about a character called Friday Kapandi, which is a wonderful name anyway. I mean, how many people do you know who are called Friday? You've got more chance of finding a guy called Friday in Zambia or Zimbabwe or Tanzania than you have in Ontario, I suspect. Although I wouldn't know, I've not researched it, but I think that's probably the case.
Yeah, and so the story is called Friday's Tale.
Friday's Tale, yeah.
And in this story, you were in England, and an opportunity came up to move to Zambia for 2 years to work for a bank to be their agricultural development officer. Is that correct?
That's it. Yeah.
So what is an agricultural development officer for a bank, you know, as a bank sees it?
As a bank sees it, I was the link between bank head office and all the branches who are involved in agricultural lending.
Okay.
So finance to farmers, large and small. And in Zambia, it was of large and small, but given the politics of the time and the fact that Zambia had been independent for about 8 years when we got there, the bank was trying to get more and more into small scale lending to small scale farmers. Difficult areas. And I guess that's why they needed somebody like me.
Yeah, to help.
My predecessor, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. And you dealt with kind of the, you know, the corner office people sometimes, and then you dealt with the branch people sometimes. Did you ever deal with clients directly as well?
Oh yes, a lot.
Okay.
And Friday Kapandi was one of them.
Right.
He was probably the smallest in terms of operation, or one of the smallest. He was certainly the one that took up a disproportionate amount of my time, because perhaps fortunately for him and unfortunately for me, his little farm was very close to Lusaka, and he could come in anytime he felt like it. And anytime he felt like it, he came in.
Yes.
And my predecessor had developed an unfortunate habit of talking to Friday whenever Friday wanted to talk to anyone. So he would come straight to find the person that he thought could help him.
Yes, no need.
Not to his branch, which, was part of the issues we had with him.
Yes. No need for an appointment. Just drop on by. I might be here.
But without Friday, I wouldn't have had a story. So,
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. So in this tale, you've left England with your wife and 3 small children.
Sure.
You are in Zambia. You, as the agricultural development officer, are traveling around doing economic development, agricultural development with the branches and with individual farmers on a smaller scale than the bank is used to doing.
Yes.
And this tale is about one particular client named Friday. Would you like to read an excerpt from this story for us? And if you want to give us any more background on that or context, that would be great.
Really, don't let me go on too long.
Okay.
When I got to my office one particular morning, Friday had sent a message to say that he would be late, as someone had stolen his bike. Now, this had happened before and will no doubt happen again. And I wish he could find some other excuse, but he never did. My office was on the top floor of head office of the evocatively named Cairo Road in the center of the city being Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia. It showed my place in the hierarchy. The managing director's office was some distance away, but also on the top floor. The world of the managing director was a very different world from the world of Friday Kapandi. Friday's world was the untidy rural fringe on the edge of a shanty town. His family had traditional rights to a small piece of land where they grew maize and vegetables and kept 1 or 2 scruffy cows. Friday's understanding of English appeared to be quite good, but his conversational skills were limited, erratic, and occasionally exotic. He liked to swear, but was able to combine calling on help from the Almighty with cursing like the crudest army conscript, all in one sentence. My managing director had never met Friday Kapandi before this day. There was no reason why he should. It's a pity that it all happened, but there we are. It so happened that that particular day we were being visited in the bank by a very important man who happened to be the Minister of Finance in the Zambian government. And this was something that you had to kind of treat very carefully. We were looking for more understanding from government, and the government were looking for changes in bank policy. However, approximately 11:30, I had a phone call from the head of bank security. Could I get downstairs at once, as someone is here who says he's got an appointment with you? Now, the timing happened to coincide with the arrival of the Minister of Finance and his entourage. I galloped down 4 flights of stairs into the area, and I was met by a scene that resembled a circus ring, with my late arriving visitor as the ringmaster. Friday was wearing his usual set of clothes for the reason he only had one set of clothes, and that accumulated from local second-hand markets. His green and black check trousers were filthy, and his blue shirt had long lost its collar. As always, he had on his Dodgers baseball cap that he once told me he'd found on a bus. "Jesus sent me a bloody cap, sir," was the way Friday described it. Rain or shine, he wore sandals made from an old car tire. I'll move on quickly. The center of the stage, that's the main floor of the bank reception, was occupied by Friday, a split bag of onions, 2 feather shredding brown cockerels, and more incongruously, if that is possible, by a large white duck. All 3 extra visitors were very much alive. The cockerels were doing the Harriet jet vertical leaps, characteristics of the bird. And they were very effective at eluding Friday and Moses, our largest and youngest messenger. The duck was less animated, except for a trail of green excreta across the red carpet that had been rolled out for the VIP. I dare not look in the direction of the managing director of the party. Little bit more?
Let's stop there, because that way people can get
the scene.
That sets the scene, and people can get the scene, and they can get the book, and they can finish that up.
It turns out, and this bit was true, that the very distinguished visitor, the Minister of Finance, was a second cousin of Friday's mother.
Yes.
And that helped to solve the embarrassment that happened when the duck went across and squirted on his beautiful shoes. That's
Yes. Yeah. And that's it's really interesting because it just shows that, where you were, there was all this hierarchy.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't mean that people weren't tied together. Right?
Right.
There were family ties and family connections, and they were really important,
And there's a kind of social context history thing. One of my other earlier books, one of the people who reviewed it said it was social history with a smile. Well,
I love that.
This is cultural variation, Africa style, with a smile, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I think it's interesting and it's important, right? Because we are kind of arranged differently than other cultures, and we forget that we are arranged differently. So when we go into another culture, we're like, we don't get it. It's like, well, because you're so set on your own how we are arranged, how we do things, that you forget that there are lots of ways to arrange a culture, lots of ways that families are arranged, and lots of ways that cultures work, and society works. And I just think I think there's something wonderful in that.
And some of the recognized, indeed renowned travel writers, people like, well, for me, Gavin Young, they bring out that distinction. They're there, but they say, look, this is me, this is what I am, and I'm here, and I'm struggling to cope with this different culture that I've dropped myself in. I've got to be here because I'm traveling through it, but I want to write about how I felt and how they feel about me. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think traveling is an education all on its own, right?
Yeah.
And so you also write poetry. So how do those two connect for you? Why short stories and poetry? Like, why not a larger memoir, or like, what is it about those?
I think the poetry came first, because occasionally I would create a poem to entertain some of my students in the middle of something boring, like a lecture on effective participation. It's not. You've got to brighten it up somehow. So I started doing that, and then out of that, I guess when I stopped being an academic, the poetry was always there, but at the same time, people wanted me to write other stuff, and I really got into writing longer things, prose pieces, because I met someone who wanted a piece for a local journal, and I wrote for the local journal, and then I wrote more for the local journal, and then I edited the local journal, and away it went. And then I'm thinking, well, out of that, I ought to write these into stories and not just things that someone else publishes. But meanwhile, the poetry is going on at the same time. And sometimes the poetry gets in the way, and sometimes one feeds off the other.
Right.
It's just the way it is. I mean, right now, that's the last, it could be the last, but that's the book that we've talked about a bit. But the next thing that's coming along is a collaboration with an artist in the UK, with a book of poetry.
Lovely.
His sketch images. He's a professional artist, and he's well recognized. His sketches and my poems, and I like that.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. So wait, you said something a while ago. I just want to back up for a minute. You used to recite poetry to your students?
Yeah, just for something different. You stand in front of 25 or 30 or sometimes 50 students, and you've got a 45-minute, 50-minute session, and it's got some riveting title like Project Management for Small-Scale Credit, or Participation in Rural Development Projects and Change in East Africa. And you think, yeah, it's okay. These people have got to sit there all this time, and they're scribbling down or whatever, but just now and then you've got to kind of keep their attention. And I would do that sometimes with a poem. Don't ask me to quote one.
No, that's fine. But would you write poems and then kind of put them in the middle of the presentation and suddenly recite a poem and then keep going?
Just now and then, yeah.
That was I think that's I would love to be in a class where my professor broke out into poetry, right? what fun.
Yeah, especially if you're supposed to be talking about serious things like
Yes.
public
Yes.
participation and effective change in a developing country.
Yes. And
Serious stuff. This. How dare you make it something we can laugh at? But maybe I'll
yeah,
something because you made me laugh at it. Who knows?
I think that maybe we should start instituting this in meetings as well. Let's just throw a little bit of poetry in these meetings, right? Have you ever been in a meeting and you want to fall asleep? Someone started reciting poetry, I'd probably wake up. So yes, perfect.
I once had a PhD student who wanted to include a piece of music in his dissertation, and his dissertation had got nothing at all to do with music, but he was a semi-professional cello player.
Yeah.
And he thought it would just lighten things up. Now, we explained that probably most of the people reading this, and especially the people who were examining his thesis, maybe couldn't even read music. But he felt he needed to, you know? Well, we managed to persuade him not to, but poetry is a bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting. So let's talk about the different genres you've written in and the differences between them. So you've did a lot of academic writing, you know, early on in your life, and then you moved to poetry and prose. So how are these genres different, and how do you transition from one to another? Like, how would you describe academic writing versus prose writing? And how would you, if somebody wants to shift from one to the other, what is some advice that you would give them?
I don't think you're consciously, well, not in my area, wanting to make a contribution to existing debate and argument and discussion if you're writing short stories and putting them together in a book with 10 or 12 short stories in.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're writing a book about the particular features of small scale economies, which I did, or about rural finance, which I did an awful lot of, or project analysis or project management, which I did too much of, you're in there contributing something that you think no one yet has put in to a whole mix of discussion and comment and learning about it. And the game is about continuing to do that. I mean, it's not a game, but you know, the business is about adding to something and developing an argument from someone else. In my other area, I've got no arguments to develop. I've got something that might be mildly entertaining and thought-provoking, and especially the poetry. The poetry is a great mixture of things that are slightly humorous, very serious, and sometimes a bit of both at the same time. And you can do that in the concentrated form, certainly my kind of poetry, in the concentrated form, which poetry is, you can do that. Whereas academic stuff, well, as long as you've got lots of references to who else has gone down that road with you, so it looks legitimate, you'll get someone to review it, and all being well, it'll go in the next journal. Yeah. And was it difficult? That's a bit cynical, but that's the way it is. Really.
Yeah. And was it difficult to transition? Did you find that when you started writing poetry stories, you were kind of writing like an academic and you had to kind of remind yourself not to? Was that transition challenging?
A little bit. I still do, actually.
Mm-hmm. Do you?
Yeah, because one of my current projects is writing the history of a golf club. The golf club that I happen to be a member of, which will be 100 next year. Uplands in Victoria. Now, I'm writing history now. And I have to kind of think, well, am I going a little bit too detailed there for somebody who, you know, don't forget, this is not something that is going to be taught as a history course. It's just so you got to be a bit careful. Yeah.
And so so one of your current projects is writing history. Do you have another current project going on right now?
Well, the two things are the history thing, which is hard work, but it's coming along. It's coming along. It will be in final draft maybe by the end of the year. It should be, because the anniversary year is next year. So we've got to get moving. But the other one is this collaboration with the guy in England who with the poetry book. It's called Village Lines, and it's going to be a big seller. And I hope everybody buys it. Maybe. It's going to be published in England anyway, so we'll see.
Yeah. Lovely.
That's two things at the same time. That's quite enough.
Yeah, no, that's quite enough. That's quite enough. So what is your best advice if somebody is watching this and they want to turn their life into poems and stories, what is your best advice to them?
I don't think you'll always know where your writing is going. I think anyone who says, I'm going to write, and the thing I'm going to write is a 250-page novel, and it's going to be about romance or crime or politics or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, good luck.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to write the things that have caught you at the moment or you're interested in at the moment. And sometimes that means going down memory lane and pulling on your own experience. And that perhaps is both the easiest and maybe the most difficult to make interesting to other people, but the easiest to start writing. Sometimes you've just got an idea. Write about the idea, but it might not turn into a 250-page novel. It might turn into a very interesting short story. And it could even turn into a bit of poetry if you're inclined that way. But write first and then mess around with it. I mean, I've got poems that turned into short stories, and short stories that actually weren't working, but they worked as a poem with 500 and 600 words in it.
Right. So yes, yeah. And does writing poetry help you become a better prose writer?
Well, that's a good one. I think it can.
Yeah.
I think it makes you examine individual words and the structure and rhythm of words. But it's because it's so important in poetry to have a rhythm. That's why people get mixed up with, God, I hear people say, well, your poetry is great, but it doesn't rhyme, and all that kind of thing. Yep. I can write rhyme, but it doesn't usually rhyme. But it's the rhythm and the structure that matters, whether it rhymes or not.
Yes.
I mean, Robert Frost, John Betjeman, and people like that wrote relatively simple poetry, most of which had rhyme with it, but it was the structure. Robert Frost works because of the rhythm and the balance and the music in the words. And if you can transfer some of that into your prose writing, maybe poetry does help now and then.
Yeah, no, well stated. So I'm just going to put this up. Where can people get more information about you, your upcoming books, and maybe buy the books that you already have out in the world?
Well, via my website, it's always great, and I'm always pleased to contact people who come to me through the website. And it's a nice website. There are I change it now and then. Right now there are 23, no less, pandemic poems on it. Things that probably only about 5 or 6 will ever get published, but I quite like them. There's a story on it which happens to be Friday Kapandi, actually. So if you want a bit more of Friday Kapandi, until I change it, he's on the website.
Yes.
And there's an individual poem which is taken from the new collection that I've been talking about that I'm doing with a guy in the UK. So go through that. Otherwise, in the UK, this one's on Amazon, and I think the second one is too, and it should be here, but it might not be. I'm going to check on that.
Yeah. So this is available.
I am mailing out these myself. And
perfect.
They're available in Victoria in 3 different places, including Bolan Books and Ivy's Bookshop.
Yeah.
But that's Victoria. But I'm happy to send things out. I have a reasonable, not too many, thank goodness, but I can get more.
Yes, yeah. You have a few. You have a few in a box somewhere, but they're not filling up your entire garage, which is good news.
Yeah, the ones I've got most of in the box are the superb third collection of poetry.
This is poetry.
Some wonderful illustrations in it as well as poems. But I'm happy to mail those out too.
Oh, wonderful! I do know that you can get this one, Nowt Home, on Amazon.com. Right. But not yet Amazon.ca. So, and you can get it on Amazon.uk or whatever the Amazon UK is one as well. And you can always go to frankwilson.ca as well and order it through Frank. Frank, you'll sign it for them.
Indeed.
You'll sign it for them. And if you heard the first,
it's a great signature. I mean, the signature itself is worth cents, even dollars.
Exactly. And if you want to finish reading the Friday's tale, that is currently on Frank's website, which is frankwilson.ca.
That's right.
And but it may not be there for long, so go check it out quickly. I've read it. It has a fabulous ending. So you do want to go check that out, and also, get the book. It's a lot of fun. And so this is Author Nation, and if you'd like more lives, please go ahead and subscribe to the Author Nation YouTube channel. And thank you for watching today. Next week, who do we have next week? Next week, we have Daniel Sanderson from Plank Sip. And this is something Frank would be really interested in, because Daniel Sanderson is in Plank Sip. We're going to talk about emerging thought leaders and academic writing, and how to get your kind of serious thought leadership writing and ideas out into the world. So if that's for you, don't miss the next week's interview next Friday, and I'll see everyone then.